In October 1347, 12 Genoese trading ships docked at the port of Messina in Sicily. But the crews weren't coming ashore to trade. Most of the sailors were already dead. The few still breathing were delirious with fever, bleeding, and covered in black pus-filled swellings across their bodies. The Sicilian port authorities took one look at the horrific state of the crews and ordered the fleet expelled immediately. But the order was completely futile. The pathogen had already reached land. Over the next 48 months, the disease swept northward from Sicily. It carved a path straight through Italy, bled across France and Spain, crossed the Channel into Britain, and pushed eastward through Germany, Scandinavia, and deep into the Ottoman Empire and Russia. This chart of the European population illustrates the absolute devastation. The line plummets in the mid-14th century, representing somewhere between 25 and 50 million people killed. That was up to half the continent's entire population. And as you can see by the long, flat line that follows, human numbers in Europe wouldn't reach their pre-plague levels again until around the year 1550. The speed of the geographic spread, combined with that staggering mortality rate, makes those 4 years the single most devastating pandemic in recorded human history. The singular, invisible force responsible for all of this horrific death was a microscopic, pill-shaped bacterium called Yersinia pestis. It attacks the human body in 3 distinct ways. The first is bubonic plague. The bacteria targets the lymph nodes, causing extreme, painful swellings, called buboes, in the groin, armpits, and neck. It kills between 30 and 90% of those infected, usually within a week. The second variant is septicemic plague. Here, the infection directly infiltrates the bloodstream. It moves rapidly, causing massive internal hemorrhaging and blackening the skin, often killing its host within a matter of hours. The third and most lethal form is pneumonic plague. The bacteria reaches the lungs, allowing it to spread directly from person to person through the air via respiratory droplets. Without modern antibiotics, this form is essentially 100% fatal. Europe faced a nightmare scenario. All 3 lethal variants were present and actively tearing through the population at the exact same time. We now know exactly where this specific strain came from. In 2022, researchers studied graves near Lake Issyk-Kul in modern Kyrgyzstan, marked with tombstones from 1338, identifying pestilence as the cause of death. DNA extracted from those graves is a direct match for the ancestor of the strain that hit Europe. From Central Asia, the outbreak traveled west. By 1346, it arrived at the stone walls of Kaffa, a wealthy Genoese trading port on the coast of the Black Sea. Kaffa was under siege by the Mongol army of Khan Janibeg. When the plague began ravaging the Mongol ranks, they loaded the infected corpses of their own dead onto catapults and launched them over the city walls. It is one of the earliest documented instances of biological warfare. Trapped inside with a rapidly spreading disease, terrified Genoese merchants scrambled onto their ships to escape. As they sailed westward toward the Mediterranean, they unknowingly carried the plague with them, hidden away inside the fleas feeding on the ship's rats. The vast interconnected maritime trade routes that had built medieval wealth now functioned perfectly as a high-speed distribution network for a biological catastrophe. When those ships docked, urban centers collapsed. The writer Giovanni Boccaccio lived in Florence in 1348. He documented neighbors refusing to enter each other's homes and terrified parents abandoning their own sick children. The city lost 50,000 of its 85,000 residents. The stories were identical everywhere. Observers in Paris reported 800 bodies being buried every single day at the epidemic's peak. Meanwhile, England's total population fell from roughly 4.8 million down to 2.6 million, a 46% drop in just 3 years. There were simply too many bodies, accumulating too quickly for any functional society to manage. The basic survival instinct severed the fundamental ties holding communities and families together. At the time, nobody understood what was happening. Germ theory was centuries away. To the medieval mind, the plague had to be an astrological misalignment, or more commonly, a direct punishment from God. That desperation for answers turned lethal. Communities sought human scapegoats, often blaming the Jewish population. This paranoia triggered horrifying pogroms across the continent. murdering tens of thousands of people who had absolutely nothing to do with the disease and were dying from it at the exact same rate as everyone else. Others internalized the blame. Groups of penitents, known as flagellants, marched from town to town, publicly whipping themselves to atone for humanity's collective sins, until the Pope himself had to publicly condemn the movement. But one practical idea emerged from the port of Venice. Officials began forcing arriving ships to drop anchor in the harbor and wait out a strict observation period before anyone could disembark. The mandated wait time was 40 days, or 40 giorni in Italian, giving us the word quarantine. The Venetian authorities didn't know about microbes or incubation periods. The policy was based entirely on empirical observation, but it isolated the vectors of transmission long enough to prove that careful human intervention actually worked against the slaughter. This graphic visualizes the immediate economic aftermath. The sudden, massive drop in the working population created a severe labor shortage. Landowners desperately needed crops harvested, which meant the surviving laborers could suddenly demand dramatically higher wages. Peasants realized their own economic leverage. They began moving to find better pay, breaking their traditional binding ties to the land. This massive shift in bargaining power accelerated the collapse of the feudal serfdom system across Western Europe. The religious hierarchy was also badly damaged. The church had failed to explain the crisis or provide any kind of cure. And because frontline clergy often stayed behind to care for the dying, priests perished in extremely high numbers, stripping the institution of crucial moral authority. And the threat never truly left. Roughly 30 major epidemics continued to strike Europe until about 1720, including the Great Plague of London in 1665, which killed an estimated 100,000 people. Yersinia pestis is still active today. It remains endemic in wild rodent populations in parts of Peru, the Democratic Republic of Congo, the western United States, and here in Madagascar. The World Health Organization still logs up to 3,000 human cases every single year. The difference today is modern medicine. If caught early, a disease that depopulated continents can now be cured with a basic course of antibiotics. Left unchecked, this microscopic organism proved powerful enough to kill half of Europe, dismantle the feudal economy, and shake the foundations of religion, forcing the reconstruction of society. Next time, we shift from a biological terror to a human one. We're looking at a 15th century prince of Wallachia, Vlad the Impaler. We'll explore his brutal political tactics, his horrifying methods of psychological warfare and torture, and how those real-world actions were eventually discovered by this man, author Bram Stoker. It's the true history of how a ruthless medieval warlord was transformed into the legendary vampire Dracula.